Hey guys, I just had my cup of coffee and I'm taking a couple of minutes break and I said, you know what? I'm going to share an idea. This is not an original idea as much as it's my understanding of some core philosophies and principles that I learned through my education as a young Marine Corps officer. And it has a lot to do with leadership. It has a lot to do with organizational structure and management, if you will. But it largely speaks to how to be nimble and fast and responsive, which I think is a challenge that's high on the list of many organizations today. So if we take a look at a battleship, and a battleship is this huge, powerful thing that's specifically designed to do a function. But to turn the battleship, as we all know, at least metaphorically, it takes miles and miles and miles to turn a battleship around. So if a battleship was headed this way and we needed to go in the opposite direction, just because of its size and how it navigates through the water and all the things required in terms of making that turn, it would take miles and miles and miles to turn that ship around and head it in the opposite direction. And let's just say this battleship weighed X or had a displacement of X. So here's the idea. Let's imagine a different construct. Let's imagine you assembled a bunch of speedboats, or better yet, jet skis, and you assembled enough of them to have the same displacement as X. You would essentially have the displacement of the battleship moving through the ocean, but essentially there would be a bunch of little speedboats. So we all understand that a speedboat can, jet ski, if you will, can by comparison to a battleship, turn on a dime. So because of that, if you could get your group of speedboats to turn on a dime, you would essentially be doing the equivalent of having a battleship turn on a line. The problem is the difference between how a battleship is constructed, organized, and operates is completely different than how a speedboat operates. So how do we do that? How do we get a battleship? How do we get, how can we communicate in a way? How can we control a bunch of speedboats? I think there are 4 things that allow us to do this: core values, empowerment, cross-functional awareness, and directions. And today, just because I'm only taking a couple of minutes to talk about this, I'm just going to talk about direction. Not the direction you're going, but how you give directions, your method of giving instruction, directions, orders. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because it actually brings into play, it's controlled by core values, and it highlights and takes advantage of the idea of empowerment, and it turns cross-functional awareness into an advantage. So here's the idea is this. In the Marines, we're taught to give mission-type orders. A mission-type order is when we explain the result we want and why without giving the details on purpose. We do not give the details as to how they accomplish this result. We allow the person responsible for that result to decide it based upon real-time things in their real-time environment. An environment of execution is usually separated or distant or different from the environment of planning and strategy, right? So this is how we actually do centralized control, but decentralized execution. The details of how things are executed is actually done by the people responsible. And the example I like to give is, imagine that you're a unit and it is imperative to your strategy that the enemy not cross the river. And you are there as a unit at the bridge where the bridge comes across. So what in the Marine Corps, what we would do is we would tell them the result. The result is the enemy cannot come across the river. No matter what, they cannot get on this side of the river. Now, you do not tell them that, hey, you need to keep the enemy on that side of the river, and this is how I want you to do that. I want you to build this thing on this bridge. I want you to build these dams. I want you to build this fence and these monitor devices, etc. You don't do any of that. You just tell them the result you want. Now, as the person now responsible for that result and understanding the imperative, which is the enemy getting on this side of the river, the bridge just becomes one of many things that they need to take into consideration. They also have to stop the enemy if they decide to come in across in pontoons or canoes or submarines, right? You might need to go across the river and meet them on the other side to keep them from getting on this side. But you have an array of things that you can do to accomplish that mission. Ironically, you giving less detailed what seems to be a more ambiguous order, they can't come across the bridge, as opposed to a detailed order, specifically how to keep them off the bridge. The general order is way more effective. Now, one thing that I find very interesting is that a mission type order, what keeps it constructure are these tend to be soft skill things, right? What puts structures around a mission type order are the things that I talked about, core values. So that means that because we have these agreed upon core values and we have this unified identity, we know who we are, there are certain things that we cannot do in exercising that mission. Like an example of kind of Marine Corps example, we don't take advantage and hurt civilians. There are certain things we don't do because of who we are, the nature of who we have defined ourselves to be. The second thing is it encourages and leverages empowerment. People not only feel empowered in their ability to choose what direction makes the most sense and why, but they are actually empowered and they're rewarded for that empowerment. Cross-functional analysis becomes cross-functional awareness becomes an asset. Although everybody has very specific areas of expertise, they are not experts on their teammates' area, but they understand the role and function of these areas, and that goes into the planning. That makes your planning more effective in what you decide to do in the moment. And all of these are leveraged in a mission type order. A mission type order feels weird to people that aren't educated to do that because you feel responsible for the result and you may not even know the method as to which that result is being accomplished in real time. That is why those soft skills, that is why those things like core values and all that other stuff is so important, because although you don't know the details, you know that they are within the box of who you are, right? Centralized control, decentralized execution. I think it's highly effective and allows organizations to be incredibly nimble, incredibly adaptable. But if you compare it to organizations that are highly structured with very clear dotted lines and roles and functions, those organizations tend to breed, what do you call that? I'm so far from I can't even, what do you call the thing? Micromanagers. So far removed from my ethos that I had a hard time remembering what it was, right? That's why micromanagement surfaces, but that's why these nimble organizations that give mission type orders and are structured by seemingly nebulous things like core values and mission and vision will outmaneuver those highly structured organizations. Food to think about when you have your cup of coffee.